Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Specialist Domínguez. Today we'll be conducting an individual training on identifying terrain features on a military map. All the information on these slides is unclassified, so please feel free to take notes as you see fit. You will be assessed on this later today, so I suggest you do take notes. The learning objective for today, our task is to identify terrain features on a military map. The conditions are that you are to assume that you are a member of a squatter team in a field environment and have been directed to identify terrain features on a map. You have been given a map that is scaled to 1 to 50,000. The standards, essentially you have to identify the 5 major, 3 minor, and 2 supplementary terrain features on the map. There are no special considerations for this training. There are no special clothing or anything that you have to bring. A map and a pencil will be provided to you. The risk assessment for this training is low. We will be conducting this training indoors. Now, with that being said, there are several considerations to keep in mind. Please be mindful of any equipment, such as the maps or electronics that might be susceptible to damage in case you spill water or write on it with a pen. For example, don't write on the maps with a pen. So please, if you do have a water source, please make sure that you have it underneath your chairs. Now, we are still in the middle of a pandemic, so please wear the proper PPE, keep your mask on at all time. You are going to be conducting a group exercise that'll put you guys in pretty close proximity, so please make sure that you are wearing your masks. Be mindful of any trip hazards. There are wires running across the room coming from electrical outlets that are on the floor. In the event of an active shooter, please remember that your priority is to get as far away from that active shooter as possible, so try to escape. If you can escape, hide somewhere where he can't find you or she. And then worst case scenario, fight back. So with a chair, if you have a weapon, use the weapon, however you want to do that. In the event of a fire, we're going to be exiting through the only exit that this classroom has, and we're going to go straight across the hallway and rally in the parking lot. And then we'll take accountability, make sure that everyone's there. In the event that the fire is in this area, please keep in mind that there are 2 fire break glasses on the other hallway, at the end of the other hallway, and in this classroom. So if the fire is here, you could exit through those windows. Please keep in mind that in case of a small fire, there are fire extinguishers in each classroom. Make sure you grab a fire extinguisher and operate it and try to extinguish the fire. Like always, dehydration is an issue. I know you guys have been doing other training throughout the day, so take this as an opportunity to hydrate during this class. On the agenda for today, we'll be going over a quick introduction. Then we'll be talking about the 5 major terrain features, the 3 minor, and the 2 supplementary terrain features. Then we'll have a practical group exercise where you guys are going to practice how to identify these features on a military map. And then you guys are going to be assessed. Now, the assessment, you guys are either going to be trained, need practice, or untrained. So, you guys want to make sure that you take notes so that you can pass this assessment. These results will be submitted and will be pushed up to leadership. And then we'll finally conclude. We'll clean up the class. We'll make sure that all maps are passed up. We'll take accountability of those maps. And then we'll conduct a quick AAR, and then we'll dismiss the class. So all terrain features that we're going to be talking about come from a complex landmass known as a ridgeline. Now, the term ridgeline is not to be confused with the feature ridge, which we'll be talking about later in this class. Ridgeline is a line of high ground, usually with changes in elevation along its top and low ground on all sides, from which a total of 10 natural or man-made landmasses or features are classified. The 10 terrain features are listed here. The 5 major ones are hill, saddle, valley, ridge, and depression. The 3 minor ones are draw, spur, and cliff. And the 2 supplementary ones, which are man-made, are cut and fill. This, I think, is a pretty useful technique to remember all these features, essentially using your fist. So across your knuckles is essentially the ridge line. Each knuckle would be a hill. The spaces between your knuckles would be saddles. Then this area right here away from your thumb would be a cliff since it falls straight down. The spaces in between your fingers here can be considered draws. And then the finger itself can be considered spurs as it's sloping downward from the ridge line. So now if you hold your hand like this and cup it, the palm makes a depression, and if you separate your fingers, the spaces between your fingers can be considered valleys. Now the only two features that cannot be identified through this method is cut and fill, but that's okay. First feature we're going to talk about is a hill, and I'm sure all of you guys know what a hill is. It's essentially an area of high ground that slopes downwards in all directions. A hill is shown on a map by contour lines forming concentric circles. The inside of the smallest closed circle is the hilltop. So as you can see here in this example of a topographical map, the smallest closed circle is the hilltop. Every other contour line following that smallest circle here in the center is an area of lower ground. So now here we have a real life picture of what a hill would look like if you were to see it in person. A saddle is a dip or low point between two areas of higher ground. A saddle is not necessarily the lower ground between two hilltops though. It may be simply a dip or break along a level ridge crest. If you are in a saddle, there is high ground in two opposite directions and lower ground in the other two directions. A saddle is normally represented as an hourglass. So again, as we can see here in the topographical example, we have two high points right here, and then the space in between would be the saddle. So here, I can't tell if you could see the red circles, but essentially I circled the spaces in between the two high points on this ridge line. So that space in between those two high points is essentially your saddle. A valley. A valley is a stretched out groove in the land usually formed by streams or rivers. A valley begins with high ground on three sides and usually has a course of running water through it. If standing in a valley, three directions offer high ground, while the fourth direction offers low ground. Depending on its size, however, it might not be obvious that you're standing in a valley because you might not be able to identify the third high ground. So essentially in a valley, water flows from higher to lower ground, and this is represented with contour lines forming either a U or V shape, and the area of high ground would be, and these contour lines will be pointing upstream, so towards area of high ground. So we'll see that in the next example. So right here you have a valley, and as you can see, the contour lines are forming U shapes right here, U right here, a U right here, and a U right here, and a U here and here as well. So these are all areas of high ground, and this is essentially where the water is flowing from. So in this example, water is flowing from the top of the image downward, so from high ground to low ground. A ridge is a sloping line of high ground. If you are standing on the center line of a ridge, you will normally have low ground in three directions and high ground in one direction, with varying degrees of slope. If you cross a ridge at right angles, you will climb steeply to the crest and then descend steeply to the base. When you move along the path of the ridge, depending on the geographical location, there may be either an almost unnoticeable slope or a very obvious incline. Contour lines forming a ridge tend to be U or V shaped, and the closed end of the contour lines point away from high ground. So in this example, we have an area of high ground that is identified by this small circle in the center, and then you have the ridge approaching that area of high ground, which if you see the actual picture or the picture that is drawn, the ridge is essentially that area that is approaching that high ground. And then as you can see, it has low points on this side and it has a low point on the other side, with basically the high point facing towards the center here and the lower point facing away from that center. A depression is a low point in the ground or a sinkhole. It can be described as an area of low ground surrounded by higher ground in all directions, or simply a hole in the ground. So a lake, in other words, would be a depression. However, a lake has water in it, so you would see it differently on a map. So usually only depressions that are equal to or greater than the contour interval will be shown. So basically what this means is if on your map, the map is only identifying contours on intervals of say 100 feet, if the depression is only 50 feet underground, it will not appear on the map. On maps, depressions are represented by closed contour lines that have tick marks pointing toward low ground. So it would be tick marks that are pointing inwards into the hole. So as you can see here, we have a circular figure, and then I can't tell if the quality is good, but you have tick marks that are pointing inwards towards lower ground. So everything outside of these tick marks is higher ground, and this looks like it could be a mine. So keep that in mind as well. A depression could be a crater, it could be a lake that has no water, or it could be a mine, a granite mine, or common in Florida. So here we have a picture of essentially what is a depression. In this case, it has water in it, but you see the higher ground surrounding the entire hole. A draw, okay, so a draw is a stream course that is less developed than a valley. So essentially it's a precursor to a valley. So it's a landmass that is almost becoming a valley. If you are standing in a draw, the ground slopes upward in 3 directions and downwards in the other direction. This can also be identified by the fact that it has no level ground whatsoever. The contour lines depicting a draw are U-shaped or V-shaped and pointing toward high ground. So in this example, we have a dotted line, and this dotted line essentially represents what is a creek. It's not a full-formed river. And then you have contour lines that are forming U or V shapes towards area of high ground. And the area of high ground can be confirmed because we have a closed circle here that is in the center of other contour lines. And then another, what would be a closed circle but is represented by a semicircle here in the corner. So high ground would be upwards in this image, low ground would be downward. A spur is a short, continuous sloping line of higher ground, normally jutting out from the side of a ridge. A spur is often formed by 2 roughly parallel streams cutting draws down the side of the ridge. The ground will slope down in 3 directions and up in 1. Contour lines on a map depict a spur with the U or V pointing away from high ground, so opposite of a draw. And in fact, when you identify a spur, you could typically identify a draw right next to it, like we can see in this image right here. So the spur would be the contour lines that are forming U downward, so in an area of declining altitude. And then in between these spurs, we could see draws that are identified by a broken up line, which could be a creek or a forming river, with V or U-shaped contour lines pointing towards area of higher ground. And so here we have a picture with red arrows. You can basically see that there are essentially 4 spurs in this image. And these spurs are basically the area that is sloping downward from the ridge. Cliff. A cliff is a vertical or near vertical feature. It is an abrupt change of the land. When a slope is so steep that the contour lines converge into one carrying contour of contours, This last contour line has tick marks pointing toward low ground. So in other words, away from the cliff. Cliffs are also shown by contour lines very close together, and in some instances, touching each other. So here we have two topographical examples of what a cliff could look like on a map. So here we have the ones with the tick marks that are pointing outwards, and this could be thought of as a cliff that is not as steep as this one down here, where you have all these contour lines converging into one contour line. Everything beyond this contour line right here is area of low ground, so it's a straight shot downwards, as opposed to this one, which is not entirely 100% straight down, but it is still very steep. So the supplementary terrain features, both of them, they're both man-made. The first one's a cut, and it's usually found together. So a cut is a man-made feature resulting from cutting through raised ground. So in other words, cutting through a ridge, cutting through a hill, or cutting through a mountain. Usually to form a level bed for a road or railroad track. Cuts are shown on a map when they are at least 10 feet high, and they are drawn with a contour line along the cut line. This contour line extends the length of the cut and has tick marks that extend from the cut line to the road bed. So in other words, it's tick marks that are facing inwards towards the contour line that cuts between it. So there's an important fact. If the map scale permits this level of detail, then you'll see the tick marks. So on the map, keep in mind, you might have to imply a cut and a fill because the map might not have the detail to show those tick marks. So it might have to be implied. So a fill as opposed to a cut is a man-made feature resulting from filling a low area. So in a cut, we're cutting through area of high ground, so a ridge or a mountain. And with a fill, we're building land upwards in order to flatten it out and make it even with that cut. So fills are shown on a map when they are at least 10 feet high, and they are drawn with a contour line along the fill line. This contour line extends the length of the filled area and has tick marks that point toward lower ground. So how you will see this is a fill, the tick marks will be pointing outwards, and a cut, the tick marks will be pointing inwards. And again, same thing. If the map detail permits it, you will see this feature. So here's an example. We can see that the fill turns into the cut. So essentially this railroad track is coming from an area of low ground where it needs to be filled to match the cut that they're doing across the ridge. So as you can see, the tick marks on the cut are facing inward and the tick marks on the fill are facing outward. So now we've arrived at the practical exercise. You guys are going to split into groups of 4. And on the maps that you guys have in front of you, I want you to find, circle, and identify all 10 terrain features. You guys are going to have 15 minutes to conduct this exercise. Please do not write on the maps with a pen. You were provided pencils. If you write on the maps with a pen, it will mess up the maps and we're going to have to throw it away. With that being said, I'm going to be walking around, so please feel free to ask me any questions. This is the time to be asking these questions in case you have any concerns. And also, you guys are doing this in groups, so talk amongst each other. So in this assessment, I want to make sure that you guys actually know what you're doing before we move on to the test. All right, 15 minutes have elapsed. So I'm going to show you now how it is that you are going to perform this task to standard. And basically what I have up here is a topographical map of Jackson, Wyoming. And I have created, I don't know if you guys can see that. Let me make sure you guys can see it. Okay. So I have drawn squares and identified the different terrain features within those squares. So I'm going to bring you guys closer to the map so you guys can see it. How do I flip this? so I can't flip it. I don't know if you guys can see. So here we have a saddle, which I have marked with an X. And there's probably more saddles on this map, but you could see the high ground area here, symbolized by this closed circle in the middle, and then another closed circle here in the middle. So that space in between, again, is the saddle. So now here the valley, well, so technically, just to bring you guys out here a little bit, this entire midsection here is technically a valley, okay? Because it's surrounded by high ground all around. So this is just one big valley, but this is an example of a smaller valley here, where you basically have high ground in pretty much every single direction. There's a river cutting across, and then where that X mark is essentially that area of low ground in that valley. So here we have spurs identified by the arrows. Basically, you see the contour lines going or making U or V shapes towards areas of low ground, okay? You have 3 of those. And then obviously here you can also identify draws if you wanted to as well. The draws are where this creek or river is flowing. The contour lines that are forming a V or a U towards an area of high ground, which is down in this side right here. So here we have a depression. And that depression, you could see, has tick marks that are facing into the crater. Okay, so that is one big depression right here. Now this is a hill, and it's not a hill just because it's called Boyle's Hill. We could see that it has one closed circle in the middle here, and then every single contour line beyond that hole is, beyond that high ground is lower altitude contour lines. So now over here, we have the closest thing to a cliff on this map, which is essentially, if you could see it right here, how these contour lines get really, really, really close together. And it forms a very steep landmass. And essentially, that would be a cliff. Now up here we have a ridge. I hope you guys can see that. So essentially, we have that high area right here, and then the ridge line approaches the X from the top, and that would be the ridge. Now this is an implied cut and fill here, because there is a track. I don't know if you guys can see it. There is a broken track, which is basically an off-road track, and then it becomes a major road here into the area of high ground. So it's going from a low ground area, right, to a high ground area. And so it implies that this roadway here that's broken up, where the line's broken up, has to be filled in to match this area right up here, which is higher ground. And so down here we have our draws, which are basically the contour lines that are making a U or V shape towards area of higher ground. Okay. All right, so now that we've gone over the practical exercise and you guys have had enough time to practice, we will now be conducting an assessment. You will have 20 minutes to conduct this assessment, and your scores are going to be based on this standard right here. You're going to be either identified as trained, needs practice, or untrained. Essentially, if you need practice or you're untrained, you're going to have to retrain tomorrow at 8 after chow. So in order to receive a T, receive a trained designation, you have to score 80 or above. So now, I'm sure you guys are good at math. In order to receive an 80 or above, you guys have to you guys can only miss 2. Okay, so if you get 8 out of the 10 features correct, you will receive a T and above. If you miss more than 2, you will either be a peer U and you will be a no-go. So you'll have to be retrained tomorrow. Okay, with that being said, is there any questions before we move on to this assessment? All right. So up here, you guys have a map. So what I want you to do is on the sheet of paper that you have in front of you, write the numbers 1 through 10, and you're basically going to identify, based on the numbers on this map, what terrain feature are being identified by those numbers. So right next to the number, I need you to write the terrain feature. So please make sure on your paper to write your name, your first line leader, and what unit you belong to. I'll be walking around making sure that you guys are doing this correctly. Don't ask me any questions as I walk around, I'm just observing you guys doing it. All right, time has elapsed. At this point, please pass up your assessments to the front of the class. I will collect them and I will grade them now, and I'll record your results. Okay, results have been recorded. I am now going to report these results to leadership, and I will identify anyone who needs to be retrained. Those of you, again, that need to be retrained will come here tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we'll go over everything we went over today, and you guys will redo an assessment with a different map and different numbers, of course. Alright, so at this time, please pass up all maps and pencils. I'm going to take accountability of all our maps, make sure we have all of them, we didn't lose any. I'm going to make sure that no one wrote on these maps with pens, in case I might have to request other maps from supply. Alright, so we'll be conducting a quick AAR. So with that being said, what was supposed to happen today? Today we were supposed to train on identifying terrain features on a military map. What did happen? We did in fact learn how to identify terrain features on a military map. Are there any sustains or anything that we did good this time around that we can maintain for future trainings? Is there anything that we can improve on? Anything that we did wrong that we could improve on? Alright, so now what can we do to make sure that we improve this training in the future for the unit? Alright, so we're going to recap the safety assessment. So again, as we said at the beginning, the risk assessment was low for this class. We were conducting it indoors. Luckily, there was no fire, no active shooter. Everyone kept their mask on. Proper PPE was followed for COVID. And we had no injuries, nobody tripped on anything. Everyone put their chairs in and was mindful of the wires. And everyone had a water source, and I saw that everyone was drinking water, so that was good on your part. Alright, so now we're gonna clean up, so please everybody contribute. Everyone get a mop or a broom. We're gonna clean out this classroom, we're gonna sanitize it. Please make sure that we wipe the tops of the tables. Make sure that everything is disinfected. Alright, now that we have done that, we're gonna make sure that the classroom is secure and you guys are dismissed now that the classroom is clean. You guys have a great day.